So that's what led us to start LeanDNA, and our focus is really, as I'll talk about in this presentation, is on the area of inventory reduction, shortage management, and also how do we drive improved cost reduction in the organization. As I go to the next slide, this kind of highlights the different technologies that we've seen as you start getting deeper and deeper from the customer down into the factory and into the supply chain. And what you can see in this slide is that as you get closer to the factory, the ERP systems and the supply chain systems get used less and less. And the use of Excel and homegrown solutions, even pencil and paper, get to be used more and more. We also find that these tools, and part of the driver behind these tools, is that they really lack the detailed analytics that help people understand root cause analysis and what exactly are my top 10 or 20 problems that we can start to work on improving. We've also found that from an IT perspective, a lot of these tools work well in general, but as you start getting into the needs of a lean supply chain and down to the lean factory more and more, there's often a large lacking in the domain expertise in terms of how these tools are built. So as you reach this kind of collision between, the people building out generic IT tools and the people that are really the lean domain experts trying to solve a specific problem, there's a gap. And because of that gap, that's created this whole creation of these manual, homegrown Excel-based solutions, which in our opinion is actually getting worse and worse than it is getting better and better. So as you start to look at what's missing after a typical ERP implementation, this slide will identify what are the most common areas that companies trying to create a lean and improve supply chain have identified. You'll see that on the left. And as you see on the top, manufacturing analysis, quality and management are the top two. As you get deeper, you'll see things like plant scheduling, production sequencing, and so on. But what we've really attacked when you have the goal of reducing inventory, managing shortages, improving costs, is the top two. And many of you have probably heard the term big data, data analytics, business intelligence, and the potential application of that, and when people describe the needs of it, are pretty broad. But what we found in our work with LeanDNA is that there's really two big areas where we see the largest opportunity for the application of big data. And that's in the area of supply chain and quality. The reason why we feel that these are the two biggest areas of opportunity is that they're very heavy on the use of data and analytics, where other areas, when it comes to things like scheduling, labor management, work instructions, they tend to be either very change management driven. They can require a lot of process change, which are great things to do, but it requires a lot of engagement between people and data and systems. So the opportunity that we see to attack first is this area of manufacturing analysis, quality management, because they can really be improved significantly through good use of data, good use of data analytics, and the application of specific domain expertise around those opportunities. When you look at how that gap is being filled today, in terms of the use of homegrown solutions, Excel, as I mentioned earlier, it's primarily people in Excel spreadsheets. And I think many of you that are working in factories, work in the supply chain, you've seen the situation where either from a corporate perspective or across the organization, they've implemented either ERP or supply chain, and it actually works great when you start talking about finance, master data management, product life cycle management, inventory management, finance. I mean, it works great in many, many areas. But as you start getting deeper into order policy optimization, shortage management, tracking quality data, quality analytics on the shop floor, there's a gap. And as I mentioned earlier, it's primarily driven because of this lack of domain expertise by a lot of the solutions that are being currently developed in this kind of factory supply chain area. And so because of that gap and that kind of lack of deep domain understanding, each individual working to try to solve a very specific problem has created their own spreadsheets to go and build tools to go manage it. So again, because of that disconnect between IT and domain experts is creating an issue, but unfortunately from what we're seeing and working across many large organizations in many different countries, we're finding that the problem is actually getting worse in terms of the ability for the existing software solutions to actually drive the day-to-day actions and identifying the opportunities that are going to really go help reduce inventory and manage shortages. And from my own perspective, I can give you a reason why we've seen it is that, in my case in particular, if I'm going to go hire the best software developer, for my team or somebody that's really going to be innovative, I tend to look for people 5 to 8 years of experience because they're going to know the latest technology. They're going to be the most effective at really building out new and innovative solutions, leveraging the latest technology. If I'm going to look for somebody that's going to really be great at inventory strategy, SIOP, what's the best way to optimize order policies or size Kanban systems or consignment systems, I'm going to look for somebody 25, 30 years of experience that has the understanding of these deep domain practices and best practices. So because of that gap between the 25 to 30-year-old person that really understands the domain and the people developing the solutions that are 5 to 8 years of experience, they're not being pulled together. They're driving one solution on one side that's not necessarily solving the problem identified by the domain experts, and it's creating an issue, and that issue is being solved through these Excel spreadsheets. So when you look at the business trends that we're seeing currently in the industry, the first is when I first started 25 years ago and working with my Japanese firm, people weren't sure what lean manufacturing was. It was just starting to take place in certain industries. People were starting to implement it in different areas and then trying to scale it, but it was really just beginning. Jump ahead to today, I think about at least over 90% of the major manufacturing companies that we're aware of or that we work with are implementing lean manufacturing initiatives to some degree. I'm also on the board for a group called the Association for Manufacturing Excellence that puts on a lot of lean conferences, and the growth that we've seen in our organization and the adoption of lean is now not about do I do it or not. Everybody's starting to do it. It's only about how do I do it better, how do I do it faster, and how can I leverage best practices around other companies to make my transformation go quicker and achieve better results. The business problem that we find companies are experiencing is because it's now something everybody's trying to do. There's a lot of training out there. The strategy is well understood. The techniques and the tools are well understood. That's been very successful, but there is a technology gap between the goal of implementing the strategy and what are the tools that we can use and that exist to really support the day-to-day execution of lean and driving inventory reductions. We've also found that the use of cloud computing is now something that's growing and being more widely accepted. 5 to 10 years ago, it was just becoming new. I think even 3 or 4 years ago, security was a major concern. Now what we're seeing really dramatically over the last year or two is that the use of SaaS and cloud-based applications are now becoming a trend that more and more companies have not only accepted, but they're actively trying to move more and more applications to. And what that does is it really creates an opportunity to link to these existing systems and complement those to provide these kind of best practice analytics and not try to replace what's there, but just complement the existing technology. And this is also by implementing and moving towards a hosted environment, the ability to share these best practices and create visibility across sites or across organization becomes very, very easy. So for those companies that are starting to implement supply chain analytics within your factory and within your supply chain, we see kind of 4 key steps that need to take place. The first is this area of ETL data connectivity and extracting the data from your existing systems. So the good thing now is that there's some very easy out-of-the-box tools that allow you to connect to these existing systems and do it in a way that you're not writing custom extracts, but you're doing it through more of a visual mapping interface. Instead of taking now weeks or sometimes months to get connected, you can now do things in hours or days. The other key aspect of these emerging ETL data connectivity tools is the fact that it's easy to explain to end users how you're extracting the data, where you're pulling the information from. Why that's important is that from our experience, when you talk about the world of data analytics and driving order policy optimizations, getting people such as buyers, planners, analysts, supply chain managers to believe in the reports and the analytics, it's important for them to believe in the accuracy of the data. If it's just an extract that nobody can see, that becomes very difficult, but in the new emerging tools that use this kind of visual mapping, it becomes very easy for you to walk through the end users to explain exactly where you pull this information from, get their buy-in, validate the data, which now makes the next steps much easier. Once you connect the data, the next thing is to be able to analyze the data, and the key thing there is not just doing generic reporting where there's a lot of tools out there, but having out-of-the-box, pre-built, domain-based analytics that look for very specific problems that I'm going to talk through examples here on my following slides. Once you analyze the data and generate the reports, the next key area is to be able to drive actions. And this is where we found a big gap in the existing BI or analytical solutions that are very focused on graphs and trends and data, but they're not really linked to a lean manufacturing-based approach to how you drive improvement projects and drive actions in the factory. So things like the use of the A3 and linking metrics to initiatives through the use of a Hoshin planning process. For a lot of the lean factories out there in supply chains, they understand that, but for generic IT tools that are just driving graphs, that's not something they've even thought about. So we think that analyzing data is great, but to drive results, you need to have the ability to link those analytics to an action tracking process. And the last thing, which any, I think, lean practitioner really preaches is talk with data and really drive things based on clear targets and measure what you do and identify those results against the targets. So this kind of process here of 4 steps is really based on a lot of the PDCA or the DMAIC process of really define, analyze, measure the information, analyze it, and then once you implement, be able to track the results, report those, and then start over again. And so with the whole area of data analytics, we want to apply the same process, even though it's software, apply the same process, and that's where we think there's a big gap and big opportunity out there that will really drive major results in terms of inventory. So based on our 25 years of experience in this area, we've actually over time built out kind of a 10-step process of, from beginning to end, when you look at an entire organization, what are the key things that need to take place to be able to drive major improvements in inventory, shortages, flow, on-time delivery, and even quality. So but there are a lot of steps, and it tends to be a journey. But the good thing is there's really 3 steps up front that we think are these initiatives that you can take within the next 30, 60 days that can have a huge impact on inventory that tend to be very data-driven. And as a strategy, what we often recommend is use these steps to drive quick wins and free up working capital, and then use that cash to drive the things that are more consultative, change management driven in your organization, which could be related to changes to flow, training. It could be related to machine investments, but there's a lot of things that have to happen as part of lean that take big investment. So why not go after those quick wins first in the first 30 to 60, 90 days, get people bought in, get people excited, and then use that money to go fund other initiatives. And so those first 3 steps are what we've seen are these very data-driven steps that can be implemented very quickly. Now, as we start to take the steps of identifying our goals, what are the initiatives we're going to take during that first period, who's going to own it. There is a process that we recommend that leverages what we call the X matrix, which is a nice visual approach of linking on your left the goals of your site or of your organization. And this could be a supply chain team, it could be a site, it could be an entire organization. But the key thing is, for whatever team is going to drive these initiatives, what are the goals specific to that organization? Once you've defined that, the next thing is, what are these initiatives that we're going to take within our organization that are going to actually help us achieve those goals? And you can see on here in the black dots, we're linking the goals to the actual actions. Once we've identified those actions, here on the right, the next area is, what are we going to do to measure day to day the success of those initiatives against key performance indicators or metrics? And then on the far right, who's going to actually own each initiative? And let's use a very simple red, yellow, green color coding to identify whether that initiative is on track or not. And then finally, if those are our goals and these are our initiatives and this is how we're going to measure it day to day, finally, what are going to be the financial impacts on our business if we're able to do that? And then let's track that day to day and week to week to look at what was our target annual savings and what did we actually achieve today. And so this kind of visual representation around how we set goals and actions and measure and drive results is going to be key in terms of how we're going to set these goals around inventory reduction, actually drive those and track those to make sure that we're seeing the results. So when I talked about the first steps in terms of the supply chain, even after 25 years, I typically, when I first go into a factory, this is one of the first graphs I'll take a look at it in terms of how they view their business. And so if you look at a simple characteristics of a factory or supply chain in terms of what is your average daily throughput cost, which would be your average daily demand times the unit price, that would represent this column on your left. And then on the bottom here, we're just showing all, as an example, what are all the different parts that you make. And as you can see here, it's just kind of a random pattern. And what you find is that for obviously certain people in the organization and people driving strategy, they kind of understand that there is a pattern we need to look at. But when you look at buyers or analysts, the people that are really driving the supply chain improvements day to day, they're constantly, firefighting. There's not a real clear pattern or prioritization of what they need to focus on that day. What's going to have the biggest impact on inventory? What's the biggest impact on spend or shortages? There's not really the drivers day to day that gives them that focus or that prioritization. So when you look at this particular graph, in a way, this is exactly what factories or how factories view their organization. So the first thing that we like to do when you start looking at the supply chain strategy is take that graph, which is very random, but really spin it around and say, let's now Pareto it out and let's look at what are your runners, your kind of repeaters, and then ultimately what are your stranger products. So again, this is based on the average daily throughput cost, but instead of it being a random pattern, I'm now looking at the highest average throughput costs on the far left, and then sorting it to the right to those that have the lowest throughput cost. And I can tell you, whenever we go into a factory, we always find there's this kind of 10% to 30% of the parts that represent, 70, 80, even sometimes 90% of the average daily throughput cost or spend. So what that means is that if you can focus on those on the far left and have a good impact on the way order policies are set, the way safety stocks, min-max common levels are set, that's going to have the biggest gain. But on the far right, we still want to size those. But if we were to prioritize, we want to focus on those on the far left first. And as you can see here in the analytics that we use, if there's an opportunity to improve that particular part, which could be around policy, safety stock, and other characteristics, it's highlighted in red. Looking at the same graph, one of the metrics we'll first look at is once we prioritize it like that, is if these are your highest average daily throughput costs on your left, we want to look at today, what is the current day's coverage that you have for each of these parts from left to right. And what we often want to see as you go from left to right is that these that are on the far left, we actually want to be ordering those more frequently. So if you look at this particular example, this represents kind of in general terms, we're calling it order policies, but what defines this pattern could be done a variety of ways depending on whether you're using SAP or Oracle or an Infor solution, a lot of the companies that we typically link to. This order policy can be set a variety of ways, but the goal is still the same. So in this particular case, let's say my order interval is set to have that part ordered every 30 days. And then we decide that if that's an A item or an item that's very far on your left, we want to actually have that part come in every 7 days. By making that change from ordering every 30 days to every 7 days, you can see that we could have almost a 75% reduction in inventory. And people think that, well, that's always being done, it's not an issue. But I would say 8 out of 10 companies that we deal with that are often multi-billion-dollar multinational companies are not maintaining these type of policies on a month-to-month basis. Maybe they did it once a year or sometimes every 2 to 3 years, but this is something that's not a one-time thing. These are things that have to be managed on a month-to-month, sometimes quarterly basis, but at least for the runners, you want to be looking at these parts every month. So if we can do that, this is an example of a real case study where these were your runners over here, high volume. This is where I spend the most on a month-to-month basis. And you can see when we looked at days coverage, these actually had some of the lowest days coverage. In fact, we had some shortages where you then were followed by some that had extremely large amounts of days of inventory or days coverage. So things were out of balance. And so our goal in setting order policies and optimizing these in your existing systems is to use analytics to make those recommendations, then implement those in your system. And the goal would be to see this type of blue line that I'm showing here, where on the far left, you may have 7 or 8 days coverage, and then as you move from left to right, it increases to 20 days, to 60 days, even to 90 days or 6 months. But 6 months days coverage over here could be $1,000, where 6 months over here could be $500,000. So the goal is to get these coming in very frequently and these on the far right coming in less frequently. And that's something that's a quick win that, again, I would say 8 out of 10 companies are not managing these type of policies well on a day-to-day basis. So as you start to look at your supply chain strategy, the key thing is to have kind of a closed loop process. The first is we need to be able to link to data and pull from your ERP system, ideally on a day-to-day basis. We then want to highlight what are those biggest opportunities. So as I mentioned earlier, the biggest challenge that supply chain teams have in terms of reducing inventory is the lack of prioritization and ease of visibility of the data. And again, because of those issues, they're doing everything with manual spreadsheets. And because they're doing things in spreadsheets, the ability to easily update it and to collaborate with those tools becomes very problematic. So once you automate and you pull the data from your ERP system, now it becomes very easy to highlight those opportunities on a day-to-day basis. The next thing is to be able to track and follow up on those actions that are now prioritized and make sure they're getting closed out. Summarize those results, and then start over again. So again, it's simple, short-term actions with target, very simple list of what are the priorities, and then be able to update that kind of daily, at least weekly, in some areas that we may be doing on a month-to-month basis. Once we start to develop those kind of analytical capabilities, what we found is very effective in terms of setting target is the ability to not just look at how did we do looking backwards, but what can we do looking forwards? And this, is to start to give everybody some kind of concept of, well, what exactly is the potential opportunity out there? So if you look at this graph, what we're showing here in orange is if you look at all the existing ERP order policies in your existing system, which is really what is my future demand, what are my future POs that are coming in, what's on hand, how is each part set up to be procured and the order policies in the system? What is my inventory going to do going forward over the next 6 months? And we want to do that part by part and then roll that up. Then in blue, we want to look at the same data, but if we were to optimize these order policies, what is the potential that I can achieve in inventory reduction over the next 6 months? And this is considering true demand. So if you have excess material and there's no demand, you'll never burn it off. So we're looking at what's truly capable to do if you can optimize these order policies, which are all primarily data-driven. So it doesn't require change management in your organization. It doesn't require changes to your processes. It's all about optimizing your existing systems. And if you can do that, this identifies what that opportunity is. And now you start getting support from your team to start driving the next levels of opportunities. The next key thing around that opportunity is, and the typical question we get is, okay, that's great. I understand what my opportunity is, but what are the exact actions I need to take to actually drive that, close that gap or drive that level of opportunity? So what you want to do is start identifying those first level predictive indicators, which is what we call them, that are the things that they can do day to day, that if they follow those actions, they're going to directly lead to a closure of that gap and driving relatively quick in the next 30, 60 days, opportunities for inventory reduction. And so this is a kind of a sample of some of the dashboards and analytics we've built out, but examples would be, POs to action next 90 days. So PO management is a key process. And it's not that most buyers don't get alerts and actions, but the key problem is they lack the prioritization. And they lack specifically the prioritization based on some value. So that, again, they may have 100 things to do, but what are the 2 or 3 things I have to do first? That's where the big issue is that we've seen. So we want to be able to prioritize those actions and those predictive indicators, and then track those day to day so we can see, once they start to follow and drive those actions, how did you do the last 7 days, which gives kind of a red-green in terms of are you doing good or bad, and that helps the supply chain managers to keep on top of each buyer or across each site. The next thing is to see exactly how did you do the last 90 days as well, and then to be able to drill down when there's a problem in red and see, okay, what are the top 5 parts I need to quickly drill down into to understand what action I need to take, and then create this kind of web-based collaboration between the individuals and managers and potentially suppliers, along with the analytics to see what the root cause is and have data to back up the action that needs to be taken. So those predictive indicators linked with actions and data are what can help you close that gap. This is an example of just a drill down report that once you see, let's say, the top opportunities for improvement, this is an example of what we use where we can see each part, but we characterize and we prioritize the sort of those particular parts where the savings opportunity by optimizing the sizing and the way the order policies within your ERP is set, and potentially the way your POs are aligned. If you can go attack those, what are those parts with the biggest opportunity and sort it in descending order? And this becomes real easy, especially when you can sort it by buyer, by supplier, even by like a value stream. You can easily see what those priorities are. And then in red and green, you can then see by part, how is each individual or each part doing week to week in terms of improvement. So if we see something in red and it's our #1 opportunity, hey, that tells us we're doing a really poor job in terms of following up the actions and getting those opportunities that are identified within our system to actually get those resolved and taken care of. And so to see the priority, see the red, yellow, green becomes a big opportunity for improvement. The next area is to start to identify what are those key performance indicators that we want to use to track the overall performance across the supply chain in the factory. And these really can be anything, but what I was kind of highlighting here in this presentation is what are some best practices that we often use for what we call the level 1 KPIs. The first one would be the area of customer satisfaction score. So that could be anywhere from like a 1 to 5. We want to look at the profitability in terms of the site. What is the total inventory, efficiency, scrap rate, things like safety, such as OSHA rate and on-time delivery. So it's important to kind of have these like level 1 metrics so that everybody's aligned with what are the key KPIs that we're trying to drive to. The X matrix and the Hoshin planning process will make sure that we can link those initiatives to each one of these different KPIs. You can also see month to month, we want to have like a simple red, yellow, green indicator that in very simple terms tells us, hey, are we doing good or not? When you look at most of the factories that we've actually worked in, one of the biggest problems that we found is that there's way too many metrics. So they may have 30, 40, sometimes 50 metrics with companies that we've worked with. So what we'll do is we'll often group those by like a level 1 just to help transition to where we can prioritize what are most critical first, but still not lose any of their current KPIs. But the biggest thing you want to drive is going from the 40 and try to get to the 7 or 8 that really get everybody aligned to the same KPIs in the business. I would say that the easiest thing to do is keep creating more and more metrics. The hardest thing to do is to have few of them. But the reality that we've seen is that people often create additional metrics because they don't like the performance of maybe these critical ones, which really represent the performance of the business. They don't like the results, so they create something new. So we often try to push back on that to have a few of those metrics that everybody can be aligned to. Now, by itself, just doing something like this is not that unusual. But what we think is really important is the ability to be able to link those metrics to the specific improvement initiatives that we're working on. They're going to get that metric back to green. So if you look here, once I clicked on that KPI called total inventory, in one click I can quickly see what are the different projects that I'm currently working on that are going to get that metric back to green. What is the area? Who is the project manager, the due date, and then the stage. And as I mentioned earlier, I think a stage for your company it's critical to have some sort of way to measure the progress of each initiative throughout your improvement project on inventory reduction. But those really could be anything. We've seen things from the DMAIC, which is what I'm showing here. You could use PDCA. We've also had companies that use like a level 1, level 2, level 3 way of measuring each stage. But the key thing is to have very standard way of measuring each stage and then using the same red, yellow, green to not only show you where you are, like these stages have all been completed and now I'm at the complete phase, but once I'm there, or sorry, control phase, but once I'm there at the control phase, I want to see am I red, yellow, green, or if I'm at the define phase, red, yellow, green, and so on. And if it's complete, I can see it in green as well. And then down below, if I want to see a longer trend, kind of week to week, day by day, I can see that down below. So the key thing is it's great to work on the metrics. I think that's key, but ultimately what you want to get to is linking all your projects to a specific metric so you can go back and forth. Now, as you notice here, I'm using this term A3, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the key thing about an A3 is to be able to quickly see everything about that project in one page. Now, I've talked a lot about the area of reducing inventory, which is one key focus. What you have to be very careful about is shortages. So it's a constant fight back and forth of constantly working to reduce inventory, but at the same time, we got to make sure that we don't have any shortages. So one of the things that we've seen over and over again, that at best they do it in Excel, at worst they don't even do it. So those companies that have worked really hard to build out some good tools to manage shortages, it's almost always done in Excel. And this represents what we've often seen that we've actually automated, but this is representative of what a lot of companies would have done in Excel prior to using some of the analytical tools that we've actually built. But what it's really highlighting here from left to right is it's identifying by priority, what are my critical shortages today? What is the item code? Who's the buyer? Who is the supplier? On hand, on order? And then what are my current shortages? Again, that's helpful, But what's really critical is the ability to go forward in time, looking out 6 months or even a year. What are my predictive, my future shortages potentially going to be, that if I don't take any action, it's going to cause a problem 4, 5, 6 weeks from now. So it's not about what's short today, which is not a hard thing to find out. Everybody's firefighting, they're chasing the shortages. But what you want to be doing is quickly work to solve those by prioritization. But then once you solve those, start to look at what's going to now be a shortage 4 weeks ago, and let's firefight that today so it's no longer going to be a shortage 4 or 5 weeks from now. So the key thing about a line of balance is to create a good visualization, but then be able to quickly drill down and understand what PO do I need to action and get that part here on time. The other thing that's important with this is to literally leverage the web. And what we've done is not only create a line of balance, but be able to expose this now to your suppliers. So a buyer can see what the shortage is, but a supplier can also log in and see just their shortages and be able to status their specific parts in terms of what are they going to do to get in time. If they can only deliver a partial delivery, let them provide that feedback. So we go from emails going back and forth with Excel analytics to automated analytics with web-based collaboration to actually get the problem solved. And that's where we've seen a huge impact on shortage reduction and also inventory as well, because we can be tighter on our inventory levels, but at the same time not risk having any shortages. The next thing is when I talked about the area of managing actions, I mentioned earlier the area of A3s and linking the metrics to the action. This is a little bit more detailed view. So you can see here I'm looking at the area of supply chain, and these are some common supply chain initiatives that we typically have templates for, that when we go into a site, we'll typically launch those during the first 30 days. And so these are what we'd say are the quick wins. So again, it's important to have these initiatives, but the most important thing is to have a good way to drive the specific tasks, to track the cost savings, and then use this red, yellow, green to quickly in a visual Kanban board, in our particular case, to see what the status is, and then be able to click on any one of these A3s and actually drill down into what the actual status of the project is. Now, for those of you that probably use A3, which is probably many of you on the call, you're probably aware of this. For those that you aren't, A3 in the end is really just a term that represents the size of a sheet of paper, from Europe. So it's kind of a buzzword in a way, but what the real meaning behind it is that I don't want you to give me a 20 to 30 page PowerPoint deck on what are you going to do to drive cost savings and what are your tasks and where are you. I want you to give me everything on one sheet of paper. And that's became the A3, and now even though we've automated it, the key message is the same, is tell me everything you're doing about the project, but I want it to be on one particular sheet of paper. And the key things about an A3 are target benefits and savings, or target benefits and costs. What have you actually saved? So what are your targets, but what are your actuals? Who the manager is, where are you in terms of red, yellow, green? What did you get done the last 30 days? What are you currently working on? And what do you expect to get done in the next 30 days? And then do you have any issues? So it's a very simple view, but again, in one quick slide, when I click on that particular A3, especially if it's red or yellow, I can see what's a problem, and then ask that manager or ask that team member, what are we going to get, what steps are you going to take to get back on track? And that's really the key of the A3s, and more importantly, linking these to your metrics and target savings. And then finally, when you start to look at the end results, this is just a dashboard that we often use to give you some thoughts in terms of cost reductions and inventory, is to not only track your targets and your actual, but start to get some visibility into the month-to-month savings, what tasks were completed in the last 30 days, what tasks are expected to get completed, what are your total opportunities out there, in this case 17 million, what have you actually achieved to date, how many projects do you currently have open, and what percentage of those are actually complete. On the left here, I'm just showing you kind of an overall trend of that. So in orange, it represents the total kind of opportunity savings we're seeing in supply chain over, let's say, the next year, and that's my target, and I can see what initiatives we've actually have implemented and what's that result from an actual perspective versus our target. And then down here, we're just seeing all our projects, the total target savings, and then within each area, I can see where I am, how many projects I have, and how does it roll up into the overall target savings. And so maybe what I'll do now, Tricia, is I'll kind of open it up for any questions, and I can flip back to any slides, or we can drill down into any detail based on what some of the questions are there.
Excellent, Richard. Your first question up is, how do you integrate a market demand signal into your model, for example, demand for product drops?
Okay. So a lot of what we do in terms of the demand signals, a lot of that's going to come into play with how we're driving requirements. So it depends on whether they currently are linking in that demand with their MRP or not, and what systems they have. But let's take a case where they have, let's say they don't have all that integrated. What we typically do is just pull that information from different sources. So that's why when I talked earlier about the use of these visual-based data extraction tools, those really didn't exist, let's say, 5 years ago. But now that they do, the key thing for you as domain experts is that don't really know about IT, just be aware that data integration, it should be much easier than any IT person ever tells you. So when it comes to the linkage of market demand to how you drive your requirements, I think the key thing is first getting a good, clean visibility of that information, at least as best as you can get it, and then link it to the requirements and then start generating the dashboards. Now, the key thing is that none of this, just like with Lean, it's always going to be a continuous improvement cycle. And when somebody says, well, we can't do these data analytics because our data isn't good enough, that's where you have to just take a step back and realize that this like Lean, is a continuous improvement cycle. And even if the data is not perfect, it's as good as we have. So let's get it. Let's get what those marketing requirements are. Let's link those to how we're buying, and let's see how good we're doing in terms of setting finished good levels, procurement levels based on what that demand is and what are our opportunities. Then let's go and push back on the question of, are those market requirements clear? Because if that's true, we're showing a lot of shortages. If it's not true, we're showing a lot of excess. And that linkage, as I mentioned earlier, about data to analytics to action to execution, by linking those four, even including this market demand data, that's how you can drive improved results based on whatever that level of data is. So the key thing is start with whatever data level of data you have, integrated even if it's from different sources, and then show the opportunity, and let's start the dialogue on how we're going to make it better.
Thank you. Next question. What is ETL and ETL data?
Okay, so ETL stands for extraction, transformation, and loading. And it's probably a buzzword that I tend to try to stay away from that. I should have explained it earlier. But what it is like our tools, for example, can pretty much connect to any ERP system, any database, an Excel file, a CSV file, a text file. So first it has the ability to connect to those data, and once you make the connection to a data source, you have the ability to transform the data. I'm sure many on this call are familiar with like a VLOOKUP in Excel, or doing a SQL query in a database, for example, if you're a little bit more technical. But once you get the data, you need to be able to join it, merge it with other data, and filter it out. And then once you filter it out and process it, you then need to be able to load it. And in our case, we load it up into our software called LeanDNA. So that's what ETL stands for. It's extraction, transformation, loaded, but fundamentally it's the ability to very easily connect to any data source, manipulate it, filter it out, join multiple streams of different data from different sources, and then prepare it for analytics. And that's kind of one of our tools that we have, but it's the first step in the analytical process.
Excellent. Another question. So the person stated this is a deterministic approach towards inventory. Do you have any analysis that recognizes the probabilistic nature of inventory? Hopefully you understood.
We do have some like AI-based algorithms that do use a lot of that data. So when I showed you earlier in the presentation what we called our burn-off chart, that's using It's using heuristics, probabilistic, and or predictive analytics. It's also using some machine learning algorithms because we don't always know heuristically what is the right way to analyze the data, and based on those algorithms is what we use going forward to figure out what action needs to be taken. So again, looking back is easy, but you're exactly right. Looking forward is hard, and we have a series of algorithms that we use to actually define those targets and what are the top actions your users or buyers, planners, analysts need to take to realize those improvement levels.
So you stated that LeanDNA is basically a software. What size company is this best utilized for, and how and where do you begin?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because the interesting thing that we found over the years is that we have some factories that are 50 people, one site, maybe 30 million in revenue. And then some of our largest customers are, I think about 13 billion in revenue, and they maybe have 300 sites, and some of them are using our software in the majority of those sites that were, majority of their sites, if not all of them. So it's pretty broad, and that's when I mentioned earlier my experience over the last 25 years. What we spend a lot of time on is what is this common theme of issues that I would say every company, because we tend to stay away from like oil and gas and some like continuous flow. We tend to be more focused on discrete production. But in those industries, we've tried to look at what is that 80–90% of a common issue that everybody was struggling with, and how do we solve it in a generic form? And that's what we've done. And so it doesn't really make any difference for us in terms of what the size are, because first of all, because I think a lot of the problems are the same, and for us, the most important thing is there a desire at that company to improve? And if there is a desire to improve, then whether it's a 50-person company or a $13 billion company, it almost doesn't make a difference. Where we see the biggest problem is where, it's a small company or a large company, but they don't have that focus to improve, or they're not really, even though they say it, they're not really committed to it. So in my perspective, almost all the companies we work with have a very aggressive goal to improve the business. And even if they've done a great job, they've doing lean with some of our customers for probably 20 years. We work with some companies almost for entire, that I've been working. They always have that goal to improve. As long as that's the case, the size doesn't make a difference for the tool. It's really that commitment to drive improvement.
Excellent. Next question. Can you recommend a good book for supply chain analytics?
So there's a couple things. I guess for us, there's a couple things. So there's I usually recommend, there's some books on lean that often we start with. We've actually created some white papers that if Tricia, if anybody sends us a note, or we can send those out, because we didn't find there was a lot that was out there, to be honest with you. So when we've worked with even, like I said, big multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies, they were often lacking any sort of best practices or how to do it. So again, there's probably a lot of good supply chain books, but when it comes to data analytics, there's not a lot that's out there. And I've actually been to conferences in Mexico speaking on this subject, just because people are really hungry for this, and there's not a lot out there. So if you send us an email, we're happy to send you those white papers, again, for free. We'll just send those to you. In terms of books, I don't know of any, but I think there's a couple of good analysts that are out there that have been driving some good discussions, like Supply Chain Insights, Laura Cesari. I think she's done a lot of education in this area. I think AME, there's some people we've been working with on some future books, we think, or at least maybe some e-books that we're working with them to put out. But right now I don't have a good recommendation in terms of a book, but we're happy to send you some of our white papers that we're putting out there, at least to get you started. Just send us an email.
Excellent. So one of the final questions is, the approach in your presentation will perfectly fit into the supplier certification phase of a dock to stock and ultimately into a JIT supplier surveillance program. Has it been used by any company that you've worked with?
Could you repeat that again, Tricia, real quick?
It says the approach in your presentation will perfectly fit into the supplier certification phase of a dock to stock and ultimately into a JIT, just-in-time supplier surveillance program. Has it been used by any company that you've worked with?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think I understand the kind of the gist of the question, but we do have because we go and we grab the data and we're using it for optimizing the inventory and order policies. One of the things that's important is supplier delivery, and so what we've done with a lot of the bigger systems is created these supplier scorecards that you know, at least we've used it to help with some of the performance measurement and, you know, training. And so using the data that we have, because we know information around POs and delivery performance, target levels, you know, lead times and things like that, we've been able to build out some pretty robust supplier analytics, which has been used by some of our customers for supplier certification, training, really for a whole variety of you know, improvement aspects with the supplier, but primarily to not only assess how they're doing through our tool, but then they're using it to start engaging suppliers with the improvement initiative. I think for those of you heavily engaged with Lean, you know that there's really a lot of philosophy and kind of a culture of let's share the knowledge. So we don't want to just go beat on our suppliers. We want to really work with them to show them how they're scoring, but also how to get better. And the approach that we've taken with our tools and what we've seen is showing a supplier has really bad on-time delivery is okay to give them that number, but you need to be able to explain what they have to do to get better. And if you can't give them that data to explain why they did poorly, down even to the PO level, and why, you know, why they were, you know, they delivered poorly, it's hard to start the improvement process. So a lot of what we've done is creating those dashboards across, you know, quality, cost, and delivery, but then be able to let the company drill down. So when they're working with suppliers, it now becomes a very positive, as much as it can be, a positive improvement process with data to back it up versus just, hey, here's your score, you got to get better. If not, we're going to there's going to be a penalty issue, or we're going to start looking at a external supplier to at least dual outsource too. So hopefully, Trish, I answered that question.
I think you did fine. Again, Richard, thank you on behalf of ASQ Lean Enterprise Division, its members. Appreciate your presentation today. Also, to all of our participants, you can see Richard's email address on the screen, and you can email him for those white papers. I'm sure going to. Again, thank you again, and happy holidays to everyone on behalf of ASQ Lean Enterprise Division. Thank you.